Welcome back, everybody, to another edition of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm Jordan Hill. With me this week is Kipp Adams. Kipp, we are 4 days away from Georgia football. How is this Tuesday morning treating you?
My goodness, it's game week already. You know what? It's treating me pretty well. I think so far so good. It's kind of the lull before the storm. It's we're doing our normal game week activities. It kind of doesn't feel like it. It kind of hit me that we just had college football last weekend with a couple games, but week one is right here, and I don't know. I guess the pressure's not on us. Obviously, I think we get a pretty good chance of doing our job well. I trust all of us to get it done. But for Georgia, it's just a very unique off season. Obviously, one that we haven't experienced in our line of work, and it's just it kind of feels like everything's kind of new. It's a new feeling for starting off that another big time game for Georgia to start the season, and it's just interesting to see what everyone's expectations are, whether there's pressure on the team, what the fan base is looking for, which fans are still kind of celebrating January 10th. It's just a very interesting week, and I'm interested to see how the actual team goes out there and performs after winning it all.
Yeah, you said no pressure on us, Kipp. Hey, we got to watch out for typos, posting stories too. Hey, I got to say, they're playing the Ducks, and one of the other beat writers who will remain nameless slipped up and misspelled duck for a second. Had to catch that yesterday while we were working. So there is a little bit of room for error this week, but
that'll get you some page views.
Hey, it might till it goes down, that's for sure. But let's talk a little bit. I'm going to talk just for a few minutes about what we heard yesterday. It's kind of to kick off the start of game week, having a chance to, honestly talk to several different people. Kirby Smart, Nolan Smith, Stetson Bennett, Christopher Smith, Cedric Van Pran, previewing this week. And, the things that really stood out to me, a lot of praise for Michael Williams, which I had a story go up this morning talking about Michael. I mean, the thing going back to the spring, Kirby really talked about not wanting to compare anybody to anybody, and everybody made that natural comparison to Trayvon Walker. And then we had Nolan Smith say, he's a spitting image of Trayvon Walker. And then Rylan Godey on his podcast with Tate Ratledge said that's Trayvon Walker Jr. there. So if you're a Georgia fan, I think your ears should really perk up about what they're saying about Michael, and especially for Kirby. He didn't compare him to Trayvon Walker, but he was saying, how he's not really your typical freshman, about the way he's gone about his business, the things he's done to prepare himself, and said that he's done pretty much everything a freshman needs to do to put himself in position to play. I think that's such a great sign for Mike Hill as a true freshman and what he can bring to the table. Other things that stood out, I think Dan Lanning was talked about a good bit, and Kirby kind of downplayed what kind of a big deal that would be. Any kind of advantage that Dan may have, given his familiarity with Georgia, he kind of downplayed that, and I think it's fair. I think a lot has changed, and these guys have had spring practice and a fall camp under their belts, since Dan left. A lot has changed, and, a lot of roster movement just in general. So I thought it was fair to kind of downplay those thoughts. And to me, getting ready for this Oregon game, which later in the week we'll have a podcast really going in depth about Oregon. I think it's going to be the defensive line against Oregon's offensive line. That's the biggest key to me. I think that's what's going to make the biggest difference. Nolan Smith talked about that group and the talent they have. To me, that's where this game's going to be won and lost. And it's going to be very interesting. Again, we'll podcast and talk about Oregon a little bit later in the week. But yeah, a nice little kind of startup, getting ready for the season, having a chance to talk to those guys. We'll have some more interviews tonight, so I'll have some more stories coming out of that, and just excited for game week, man. It's been a long off season and ready to get it going. And so we're going to get this thing started, Kipp. This is sort of our predictions episode of the podcast. We're going to start with some over-unders that we came up with, kind of talk back and forth with individual players, also offense and defense, kind of looking big picture. And then we'll sort of transition to the overall record we think Georgia will have when the year is done. So I'm going to start with you, Kipp, and we're going to start with the guy that we've talked about throughout the offseason very naturally, quarterback Stetson Bennett. And we got a few of the stat lines down there, and we are going to start with his completion percentage, the over-under of 68%. Kipp, are you going over or under for Stetson this year?
I'm going to go over. I think that, one of the benefits that we've talked about a little bit, but, it still could be kind of a hidden benefit to some, is just the fact that this is his first off season being able to practice with the starters, with the ones, the whole off season. And not just that, I mean, look at the guys that he has coming back. It's basically his number one, number two, number three, receiver from last year. I mean, we know George Pickens, when he came back at the end, that was a boost, but his impact wasn't really as big as anyone would have expected going into last year because of that injury. So I think he has the what he needs to kind of make that jump, and I think 68.5, 69% is well within his capabilities. It's going to come down to him being able to utilize the whole field. A lot of times when we're watching Stetson, we're going to talk about his height as being something that is going to impact his performance, and sometimes it does. Being able to not just see the middle of the field, but to see the whole field, and to see sometimes when he has some guys open. The one thing that we can't really know for sure is whether that's by design. Sometimes you'll see a guy running open. Maybe that's by design to try to pull the defender's eyes away from his intended target. But nevertheless, we see guys running open. We're expecting Stetson to hit that guy. I think this offseason's given him the reps needed to be able to do that. And we know he's going to be asked a lot. He's going to be throwing at a higher rate, most likely. And there's a chance that, his efficiency goes down a notch. But I just think that, you got a guy coming back for a fifth year. He's been in the system. And when you have all your weapons coming back too in the passing game, I think the recipe is there for him to really, really have a big year. And the offensive line should be one of, if not the best in the country as well. So I think all the tools are there for Stetson to thrive. And I think that, pushing close to 70% should be the goal. And I think it's one that's within reach for him.
I'm going to go slightly under, and it's just because of a point you made, Kipp. I think they're going to be willing to let him throw a little bit more. Now, I still think, I believe his completion percentage last year was somewhere around 65. I think he's just going to be a tick under 68, somewhere around like 67. But I think they are not going to feel as much like they got to really run the ball and only throw when they really have to, which, as the season went along, I think they got more and more comfortable letting Stetson air it out. So that's sort of where I'm leaning. I'm going to go under on 68%. I will start on the next one with the yards, 3,100 yards. I'm going to go slightly over. I think that he's got an opportunity, again, to the point we were just making, to say that he's got a chance to really air it out. And, it's been funny. I kind of feel like I've been saying the same thing over and over on different radio hits talking about this offense. They've got so many different pieces. And I think we'll really see this as we talk about some of the receiving yards over and unders we get to in a few minutes. But I think that they're going to utilize so many different opportunities, so many different weapons in this offense that I think it's going to let Stetson, accumulate some of those numbers and really be able to take, how many yards he throws for in a game and see that bump up a good bit. Again, I kind of think when it comes to different receivers, they may not, I still am not convinced we'll see like 1,000-yard receiver this year, but I think that's for the betterment of the team that we're going to see several different guys involved and playing big roles. So, yeah, I'm going to go over 3,100 yards. Kipp, where are you feeling as far as over-under on that?
I feel fairly confident. If Stetson Bennett is healthy and plays the entire season, I think he gets over 3,100 yards. I think him averaging 250 yards a game is well within reach. And I think if Georgia has the season that, we think they're capable of, they're probably going to play in 14 games. If they're in Atlanta and playing in either a bowl game or college football playoff game, then he's going to get 14 games to play in this year if he's healthy. And I think if he's hitting right at a 250 a clip, I got him a little over 3,400. I'll just say 3,450. is my prediction for Stetson Bennett this year. Like I said, we think that they're going to need him to do a little bit more this year. And I think that he's going to be asked to throw at a rate that's going to put him in that in line to to have those stats. If you remember last year, I mean, you look at him throwing for 2,862 yards last year. You also had JT Daniels with starts in there, over 700 yards there. So I mean, that's still over 3,500, 3,600 yards pretty much between the two of them. If Stetson's getting the bulk of that work, and throwing at a higher rate, being asked to throw, I think 3,400 should be, well within reach for him. And, I think that's a pretty prolific year. One of the, the better years for a Georgia quarterback, and probably a, maybe top 15 passer in the entire country when all is said and done. So you're just looking at the SEC. I think he could end up being, maybe not in the top 2, but maybe the number 3 passer in the SEC in terms of how many yards he's going to throw for this year.
Let's take the last part of the Bennett over-under and just kind of pair them up, answer them at the same time. Touchdowns and interceptions, as I said it at 33 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. Kipp, how do you feel about each of those?
I'm going to stick with 34 touchdowns. I'm going to take the over. Like I said, if he's throwing, he's being asked to do more, I think those touchdowns are going to come, at a higher rate. But I also do think, the interceptions. If he's throwing 100 more times, and let's just say if he's pushing 400 pass attempts, 8 interceptions is probably the best over under you've said on this thing. It's really tough because I want to give that one a push, but you know what? I'll take the over. He's a gunslinger when all is said and done. I think he's going to make some throws that it's going to have everyone kind of throwing their fists in the air and wondering why. It's still part of who he is, but he's also, because he takes those chances, is going to have some guys break open at the last minute and win some 50-50 balls for Georgia as well. So I'm going to take the over on both.
Yeah, I think that's where I'm leaning. I think, again, it just kind of boils down to them feeling more comfortable and allowing him to throw more. I think he is going to go over. I'd say probably like 35 touchdowns is what I would feel comfortable with, somewhere in that range. And then, yeah, I think he's going to probably be hovering right around double-digit interceptions. Again, nothing crazy. That's just a matter of how he plays, and again, being asked to throw a lot, and sometimes those turnovers happen. But I think Georgia and Stetson, this passing offense, is set up for a really good year, and it's going to be really fascinating to watch and see how it all plays out. This next one, to me, is probably the one I'm most interested in, and kind of going back and forth with how I feel. Kenny McIntosh, 900 rushing yards. Are you going over or under, Kipp, on that number?
Put me on the spot here. I will go so slightly over. I'll have him at 850. I think that he could have 300 to 400 yards receiving as well. Kind of in that 12 to 1,300 yard total yards range is where I kind of have him going right now. I don't know. Like, this one's I'm struggling with, because I just feel like you said it high, man. You said it a little high for him. I think Kenny ends up with 850 rushing, maybe 350 yards receiving. And if we're talking total touchdowns, we are I'll take the under. I think he's right under that at 9 touchdowns. I think that he's got to stay healthy for the whole year. I think that they're still going to mix it in with some other guys. I think 1,200 yards, 1,250 yards total, 9 touchdowns is probably where I have Kenny going at right now.
That feels fair. The way I kind of looked at the rushing yard total, looks like the number one back, arguably been the guy we've heard the most about coming out of fall camp. I'm gonna just kind of hedge here. I'm gonna go slightly over on rushing yards, just because I do think he's gonna wind up being that lead guy. But I'm gonna go under on the touchdowns. I'm taking that just sort of as rushing touchdowns at number 10. But I think he's gonna be a huge part of this offense. I think you made a good point, Kipp. And 2, that might kind of factor into his rushing yard total, is he is going to be used a whole lot in this passing game. And as far as total yards, I think he's got an opportunity to really help this offense in a number of ways. And I think if you're a Georgia fan, you should be excited. I think he's a guy that brings a lot to the table and has a chance to have a really good season.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, just look and see what they did with James Cook last year. He had over 1,000 yards from scrimmage and 11 touchdowns. I think Kenny McIntosh might not be as explosive, but I think his hands might be a little bit better than James Cook. So I think he's a guy that could easily have over 300 yards receiving and have 4 or 5 touchdown catches as well. So yeah, I think 1,250 yards from scrimmage. Yeah, I don't know on the how he's scoring the touchdowns. I think he might have double digit total touchdowns, but if we're doing rushing, it's probably under 10 right now.
Go on to another guy we've heard a lot about going through the fall, getting ready for the season, A.D. Mitchell, who really looks like is going to be that lead receiver. Over under 850 receiving yards and 8 touchdowns. I'll start with this one, Kipp. I'm going to go slightly over on the receiving yards. I do think that it's going to be a very interesting mix between how these tight ends are used, how the receivers are used, what the kind of breakdown is. And the thing that always sticks to me or comes to mind when I look at these things, the coaches are not going to be worried about what the receiving yards look like, who's the leading receiver. They're like, hey, did we win the game? Was the offense effective? Did we score points? And that's sort of the thing that comes to mind and what really sticks with me when you look through and trying to determine what the stats will look like, that sort of thing. I'm going to go slightly over on the receiving yards. I don't think AD is going to be around that 1,000-yard mark that we've talked about. That has been sort of the thing Georgia has chased since Terrence Edwards was here. But I think he's ready for a really good year. As far as receiving touchdowns, that's about where I kind of feel like he would go. I'll be optimistic and go slightly over, maybe 9 touchdowns. But I think he's ready for a big year, and I think he has an opportunity to really play an important role in this offense.
It's one of the few remaining aspects of the Georgia program that other coaches are still kind of recruiting against Kirby, and that's the wide receiver position. And with that in mind, I think that that'll be in the back of Kirby's mind, just taking one more thing away. He wants to win in any way possible, but I think he'll find a way. And again, it really these predictions it still boils down to these guys healthy the whole year, and so we're assuming that with all of these guys. If AD Mitchell's playing in again 14 games, I think he can get 75 yards a game. I just think he's the kind of player who wins the 50-50 battles, is elusive, and Georgia's weapons. I mean, again, the next guy we're going to talk about is going to take up a lot of attention, and then we've spent the whole offseason talking about this tight end room. And what they have in Eric Gilbert, what they have in Darnell Washington. Gosh, how are they not going to have Oscar Delp on the field too? Like it's all the weapons they have there. And at the same time, I think they're, AD Mitchell has a chance to be their most talented pass catcher when all is said and done. I think he's going to be featured in this offense better than really anyone on the team. I just think that we're looking at Kenny McIntosh being a complete back. We're looking at the best tight end room in the country with the best tight end in the country. And I think that's also going to just open things up for AD the entire season. I have him going over 1,000 yards, 1,050 yards for AD Mitchell for me. And I do not think he's going to have 8 touchdowns. I'll put him at 5 touchdowns. Things just get different in the red zone. Big plays are, you can't always count on the 40 and 50-yard bomb, to get in the end zone. And a lot of times Georgia doesn't. It's not really something that, they're worried about. They want explosive plays, but it doesn't really matter what part of the field they happen to. Just get them in the area so they can get in the red zone and make it happen. I really think that's where those tight ends are going to siphon off a lot of the touchdowns. And Kenny McIntosh catching the ball out of the backfield is probably going to take a couple as well. So, I have him having 5 touchdowns, 1,050 receiving yards, and then one more feather in Kirby's cap, and he'll be able to go this offseason and tell wide receivers, look, we did it. Okay. We had 1,000-yard receiver. It's done. We only have one in our program history in Terrence Edwards. Now we have 2. So that's one less question mark for you guys. You can put up numbers in Georgia's offense and win big time football games when all is said and done.
My old buddy from University of North Georgia, Jacob Hudson, in the comments said that is a super hot take, Kipp. You are just going all out there. We have got one more offensive guy to talk about before we switch to the defense. We're going to take a break first, but before we do that, I want to make sure and tell everybody to subscribe to Dogs 247 on YouTube. Get a chance to see all the videos, all the good stuff we've got. There are links to that in the comments for everybody watching on Facebook Live. You can go on there and subscribe, all kinds of good stuff, and only more coming with the season almost here. So we are going to take a quick break, but come back, do some more over-unders, and also eventually get a chance to talk about our season predictions for the team. Welcome back, everybody. Well, yeah, Kipp, this feels like a fitting way to end the offense, and it's looking at Brock Bowers, who was obviously the freshman breakthrough last year. We've got him at 880 receiving yards and 10 touchdowns. I am going to go under on the receiving yards, and I think I'm going to go slightly under on the touchdowns. I think it's just going to be a product of something we talked about a few minutes ago. I think a lot more people are going to be involved in this offense, catching the ball. Also, at his position group, I mean, the amount of talent they've got and are going to utilize. I think that Brock's going to have a really good year, still have a chance to win that John Mackey Award as the nation's top tight end. But I think those gaudy stats you saw from last year, I just don't think with what they've got to work with around him, he's going to quite hit that mark with either stat.
He should be, a potential 2-time Mackey Award winner, but that's a whole nother conversation to have. He was obviously the best tight end in college football last year. I think the interesting aspect is Alabama knew exactly what he brought to the table. By the time they played in Atlanta, and he still pretty much did whatever he wanted against that Alabama defense. And that is the only aspect of this that's making me kind of think, Brock's already seen, all the attention given to him by an elite defense, and it still didn't matter. Now he's going into year 2, and he has chemistry with his quarterback. Are we saying we've already seen the best of Brock Bowers after year 1? And for that aspect, it kind of makes me, pause a little bit. Replacing Jermaine Burton with Gilbert, maybe that's a wash statistically. Really, it boils down to, when I think about last year, is Bowers kind of had to be that number 1 guy because they kept having injuries at the, and they were rotating guys in and out at receiver, not by choice a lot of the time. And A.D. Mitchell was still kind of coming into his own, and Brock just went in there and was immediately the alpha and the number 1 guy in that group. But if the group's healthy this year, they should be able to spread the ball around by choice and kind of do what they want, so they don't have to force the ball to Brock Bowers if they don't need to. And I think that if the defense is going to bracket him, I think it's Stetson knows that he has other guys he can trust on the team. So I don't think it's anything to do with Brock. I think it's just going to be more of a game plan thing. And, they're still going to utilize him, obviously. But I don't think he hits the number just because I don't think that they're going to need him to this year. So I got him going under on the receiving yards and on the touchdowns. Let's just say he ends up with like 730 yards receiving, 8 touchdown catches, maybe another touchdown run. That should have been good enough to win the Mackey Award last year. So I'll go ahead and allow the under and still acknowledge that he's probably going to be the best tight end in college football again this year. And I think that he'll still make it happen when they need him to. I don't think you really got to worry about Brock. And I think that's something that Kirby Smart and this coaching staff realized real early on, that he's a self-starter. And when you get guys like that, they're truly special. And they're going to utilize them, but I don't think they're going to have to force the ball to him this year.
I agree with that point and think, again, he'll have a good year. I just don't know if those numbers will look quite like they did last year. So switching to the defense, let's start with the guy that has been there and is a veteran at this point, and Nolan Smith. I had the over-under at 70 tackles. I believe he had something like 56 last year, so that would be upping what he did a year ago. Kipp, where are you leaning? What do you think about Nolan? That number of 70 would be a career high. What do you think of over-under on that one?
I feel pretty safe in taking the under there. I just don't think that position is one that it results in a high number of tackles in general. I just don't think that they're asking him to pursue the ball carrier like that. So I think that, and I just don't think in Kirby Smart's defense you've really had an edge defender. I think he may have the high for any of their outside linebackers as far as tackles. It's just not what that position's asked to do most of the time, unless he's logging some time in at star. Which, I mean, they did that with Leonard Floyd. You could see them do something like that. They did a little bit with Lorenzo Carter, so it's possible. But I think 65 tackles is probably a good projection for a high for Nolan Smith. And I think, that's probably a good year for him if he has 65 tackles. So that's where I'll say he ends up with. I think that if he's got 70 tackles, it kind of opened my eyes a little bit. Like, was that good for the Georgia's defense that he had that many tackles? I mean, that's just something that's, you want those inside backers to kind of clean up and kind of pad the stats a little bit. That's just how their defense has been designed to do so far.
Yeah, to me, that 70 tackle mark, it kind of strikes me of like an inside linebacker in this defense, something like that. So I think I'm going under. I think he's ready to play a big role. I think he knows there's high expectations, not so much from a stats perspective, but just the role he's going to play, the leadership he's been asked to play and fill, given what this defense lost. Again, lost 8 starters from last year. I'm going to go under, but I think Nolan's ready for a big year and has a chance to put together one. Switching gears to Jalen Carter. So I have at 9.5 tackles for a loss. That is the mark, if I'm not mistaken, he hit last year. So we're essentially saying, does Jalen Carter have a better year statistically this time around than he did a year ago? Kipp, where are you feeling on this one? 9.5 tackles for a loss for Jalen Carter.
I think that almost every year Georgia has someone break into double digits as far as tackles for loss. So if we're looking at this team, who best projects to do that, it's definitely Jalen Carter. I mean, he is that guy. It's just kind of back to that Brock Bowers thing. Like, everybody knows who Jalen Carter is. There's been, we've written about him all offseason. The number one interior defensive lineman. This isn't, Trayvon Walker, where he kind of comes out of, I mean, we knew he was talented, but as far as that number one overall pick trajectory, Jalen Carter's already kind of, been anointed as, pushing Will Anderson for the best defensive player in the country. And so with that being said, I think every team is going to know exactly where he lines up on every play. He's going to have to earn every tackle for a loss he gets, but he's also probably like the freakiest, lineman in a elite group of freaky defensive linemen last year. It just says a lot about, his skill set. And so I'm not sure it's going to matter if they double and triple team him. I still think he's going to get his. And so I think, if you're looking at an over under, I think he gets 10.5. I think that's a safe bet for him. And it's kind of a safe bet just for Georgia's defense in general. I think DeAndre Walker had like 11, 13.5, from that edge rusher position. I think Roquan Smith, Nakobe Dean have both gone in the double digits. Georgia hasn't had a, interior defensive lineman get that mark, I believe. So it'll kind of be a little bit of a change as far as, what Georgia's defensive front, they're known for taking up blockers, but, they're not known for padding the stats. But I just think he's kind of a different player. And I think Georgia wants to have havoc plays, and you have to look at the roster and know that he's the guy that best, he gives you the best opportunity for those. So I think they're going to scheme to put him in situations where he can get a one-on-one situation or move him around, have him at times, have him, stand up at times, just few people at his size can move like he does. So I think they're going to put him in situations where he's going to be able to crack double-digit tackles for loss this season.
Yeah, I'm going over. I feel very confident about what Jalen can do this year. I think he's got a great chance to pass 9.5 tackles for loss. I think the situation where people know who he is, I go back to last year in that playoff run when they had Jordan Davis, when they had Devontae Wyatt. There was plenty of talk of people being like, yeah, man, those guys are good. But this 88 is who we're really worried about. This is the guy that concerns us. I think he's just that guy. I think he's got a great opportunity to shine in this defense. I think obviously there's going to be a lot of pressure and expectations put on those guys around him to open up opportunities. Guys like Zion Lowe, guys like Tramel Walthour, who else plays at defensive end. Those guys are going to have to help allow Jalen Carter to shine because there is going to be a whole lot of attention, a whole lot of double teams paid to him. But I think Jalen Carter's ready to shine. I think he's got a real opportunity to put together a good year and has an opportunity to be one of those top picks when we get to next April. Before we move on, Brad Bush said, who will lead the defense in sacks, though? Where are you leaning, Kipp? Because I've kind of gone back and forth. I think Nolan Smith, and I also kind of like maybe a more sneaky pick, Jamon Dumas-Johnson, because I could see those inside linebackers really getting a chance to get after the quarterbacks.
Yeah, I was thinking about Pop as well. It seems like one of those where you might have three guys with 6'6", and maybe maybe Jalen Carter has 6.5 and leads the team there. But I think Pop is set up to play a lot of snaps. Probably up there as far as the most snaps on the defense, maybe other than Chris Smith at safety. I think he's going to lead the team in a lot of statistical categories. I think this is kind of going to be a big breakout year for Pop. So, yeah, I think he could definitely have over 5. I just think it's one of those years where Georgia might have 3 or 4 guys with 6.5, and maybe not a guy that's in that 9 to 10 range this year. So I like your pick of Pop. I think Jalen Carter will be right there. I'm interested to see, just because we saw how Robert Beal kind of came on at the end of the year. Can he do that, when he's starting, against pretty good offensive line in Oregon? He's now the guy at one position for Georgia and not just coming in because, they lose an impact player on their defense. So can he be that guy over the course, of a season? That's something I'm interested in seeing. Obviously, the experience is going to help him, and he came out of high school, pretty talented player as well. I just think it's going to be one of those where all 4 of those guys are probably over 5 sacks for the year, pretty close to each other.
Go to the next one. Cornerback Keely Ringo, 3.5 sacks, 3.5 interceptions. Kipp, I think I'm going to go slightly over. This is a challenging one to me, more on the fact of how much is Keely going to be tested? How much are teams going to be willing to throw his way to give him opportunities? I think that people know, again, who Keely Ringo is after the play he made in that national championship game, after the way he progressed and the improvements he made once he got into that starting lineup last year. I'm going to go over. I think it will be a challenge in the fact that a lot of players, a lot of teams are not going to want to challenge him, and that'll lead to opportunities for Kamari Lassiter. He may be a guy that sneakily leads the team in interceptions because they're going to try to test that new starting corner. But I'm going to go slightly over. I think Keely is going to be able to make some big plays and has an opportunity to help a secondary that obviously still has talent, but is replacing some big pieces from last year.
Yeah, you mentioned Kamari Lassiter. That's who I think leads the team in interceptions. I just think he's going to get those throws. When you're the other cornerback and people kind of know what Keely brings to the table now, you're going to have a lot of opportunities. But as far as that over under, I'm kind of thinking back to even in the COVID shortened 2020 year, when Eric Stokes kind of came back as the guy, teams still threw at him enough where, they wanted to make sure, that their scouting reports were correct, and he made them pay for it. I think Eric Stokes had 4 interceptions during those 9 games that he played in. So I like the over under you set. I think that I wanted to go slightly over, but now, I think he's going to have 4. I just think back to that Eric Stokes year. I think Keely Ringo, has that in him to be able to make plays on the ball when he needs to. And we obviously saw him make a pretty good play on the ball when he needed to the most. And I think, that's going to carry over into this year. If you're going to be a one of the best cornerbacks in the country, you're still going to have to, prove it when the ball's thrown your way. And I think that Keeley is set up to do just that. So I think he has 4 picks this year, and hopefully for Georgia, plays pretty sound defense on one side of the field, because that's exactly what they need in that secondary. It's pretty young out there.
Kipp, special teams matter. We talk about it and we harp on it, and we are going to use that to our advantage. Talk a little bit of over-unders on special teams. You get all the facts here, man. We're going in depth. We're going to start with Jack Podlesny, 83% on his field goal attempts. I'm going to go slightly under, and only because he's been pretty much right at 81 the last 2 years. And the reason that I kind of hesitate to go over is they've got a new holder. And that's something that I think we kind of lose sight of. You think about Jake Camarda, everything he did as a punter, there is an adjustment that comes to having a new holder. So I think that Jack's going to have a good year and be a very good kicker, but I'm going to go slightly under. I think he is right around that 81% that he has had the last 2 years as Georgia's place kicker.
Yeah, it also, I guess, just comes down to what situations they putting him in the kick. Are they asking him to launch a couple 52-yarders? It's tough to project that over the course of the year. I'm not kicking always stresses me out to begin with. It's a different football game. We see them actually throwing the ball and holding the ball, and now we're doing something completely different with it. So that's a whole nother rant for another day. But I think he's established kind of who he is as a kicker, and I think that, if he improves to 82%, it's still an improvement. I don't have him hitting the over on that. I think 82% is probably right where he probably is going to be. We've seen him kick over 40 field goals so far, so we kind of have a good feel for what he brings to the table. There's going to be a game or two, or maybe he has multiple misses, and then he'll go on an 8 or 9 in a row streak. And so, I think that sets up still well for Georgia, and I think he's still one of the better kickers in the country. And 82% is what they'll have to live with this year.
Wrap up the special teams with Brett Thorson, the punter from down under, is probably going to be the starter, going to be a freshman, 42 yards per punt. And Kipp, I am really struggling with this one because I feel like that's about right where I'm very proud of where I set this line, because that's sort of where I'm teetering back and forth. I'm going to go slightly over. I'm not expecting, I don't think he's going to win the Ray Guy as a freshman, but I think he can have a good year. I think he can build on just being more consistent and being more comfortable. This is going to be a whole new experience for him coming from Australia. We've heard some of the stories from back in the spring just about how he's adjusting to living in America. That's a lot. But I'm going to go slightly over. I think he has a really good freshman year as he prepares to, potentially be that punter for Georgia the next 4 years.
Yeah, I think he comes in. He's almost as old as Stetson already coming in. But I think, I gotta see him punt. It's tough. We talk about this, Australian style punting. Is he going to be doing any rugby style? I know there's some pushback against that, and whether or not that's actually, going to be utilized, whether Georgia's going to have him do that at all. That kind of affects where I stand with this average. I think that maybe hang time might actually improve under him, but even Jake Camarda, he's one of the best punters Georgia's ever had, if not the best as far as just the average. And he averaged over 45 yards over his career, but that first year he was barely under 42 or over 42. And so I think it might be asking a lot of Brett to come in and average over 42 in year one. Is he going to be better than Jake Camarda as a freshman? Does the age play a role there? Or the fact that he hasn't played in a football game? It's just there's a lot of unknown with him. Probably the greatest unknown for us covering Georgia heading into the season. They have obviously a better idea of what they have in him than we do. I don't see him hitting 42. I see it being under 42. Still maybe by design. Like I said, I don't know how this guy's even going to be punting. And so once I see him in a game, if he actually has to punt against Oregon, we'll see. I'll have a better idea of what he brings to the table. But for right now, it's like we didn't even see him after he committed to Georgia. It was just like maybe a short workout video and that's it. So no idea what he brings to the table. Georgia, I mean, I'm sure they've been fairly impressed with him. And if he's got the inside line on the job, then he's probably going to be pretty good. I don't know. I think 42 is kind of a high bar for him. I'll put him at 41 and a half with impressive hang time. Maybe he can coffin punt it a lot. Maybe he's pinning guys, inside the 5 a lot. That might be his forte that he brings to the table. And I think Georgia will utilize that because I think special teams has really been an underrated aspect of Kirby Smart's tenure. I think he's done a pretty good job the last couple of years. Had one of the better special teams units in the years. It's that combination of, a field goal kicking and punting. It's been pretty impressive. So I don't think that's going to change at all. So I think 41 and a half, but with some asterisks there, a little bit of context of maybe him averaging a little bit less because that's what they want him to do.
Let's take kind of a broader picture, broader look at this team and look at the offense and the defense. I've got the offense over under a 40 points per game. That's just a tick above what they had last year. And then the defense, 20 points per game. The defense gave up just a little over 10 points per game last year. Kipp, where are you leaning on both of these? What do you think of offense scoring 40 points per game and the defense maybe giving up around 20 points per game?
I feel pretty confident in the over on the offense. I think this is an offense that could score 41 to 42 a game. I know that some people are going to say, what is Kirby Smart going to do in the third and fourth quarter? I still think they're probably going to have comfortable leads in most of their games. So that is a fair question, but I still think that comfortable for him, 10, 13 points probably still has him out there trying to push the ball downfield. And I think that bodes well for Georgia's offense as far as the output. I think they're over 41 and maybe pushing 42 points a game this year. And if we're talking about, scoring defense, last year's defense was special. It was the best defense we've probably seen, in the last 10, 20 years. And so even if Georgia's defense takes 50% downgrade from last year, it still has them giving up 16 points a game. And that would still be a defense that's either fourth or fifth best in the country. And that's probably right around where I have Georgia this year. I think that they're going to be in that 16 to 17 point range and still be inside the top 10. I mean, losing guys to the draft is something that you talk about in the offseason. We talked about it this time a year ago. Georgia had lost a lot in the secondary. We weren't sure about the defense, and it ended up being a historic defense. So, yes, they're going to have guys that are young at positions, but those guys are really, really talented. And so I think that Georgia's schedule sets up well. I think they're going to get a lot of young guys experience early on. And I think towards the end of the season, they're probably going to be playing pretty stellar defense once these guys, have experience, know what to expect, and the game slows down for them and they're able to react quicker and use their instincts rather than reacting after the snap. And so, I think early on you might have a team or two score 20, 21 points, but toward the end of the year, and when they're playing teams that throw the ball a lot more, like Tennessee and Mississippi State, I think they'll be ready. It's all about getting that secondary up to speed and getting those guys ready. Obviously, getting the inside backer some experience as well. But those guys were recruited to Georgia for a reason. We look at the recruiting rankings; they didn't take a dip. I don't really believe in rebuilding in college football. Everyone's got the exact same amount of players. They've got the exact same amount of recruiting classes they're able to bring in. So I think Georgia's set up to have a top 10 defense. And even, like I said, if they're allowing 6 more points than they did last year or allowing a touchdown more a game, they're still inside the top 10. And that's exactly where I think they're going to be when all is said and done.
You hit my points, Kipp. I'm thinking slightly over for the offense and still going under on the defense. I think 17, 18 points makes sense to me. And not only my point when it comes to that pick, again, we know the talent on this roster. We've seen some of these guys and understand they're going to be walking into bigger roles and asked to do more. But I think the schedule is very favorable. I think that it's manageable, and that's going to help, particularly early in the year. There are some tests, but I mean, getting a chance to play a Samford, to play Kent State, to help these guys kind of get their feet under them, I think is going to be very helpful. I think this defense has a chance to be one of the nation's best again. Not expecting what we saw last year. I think I've stressed that over and over when I've been on radio hits talking about it. That bar may never be touched by any defense, much less the one right after the one from last year. But I think this defense has a chance to be very, very good and has a chance to shine again in 2022. Kipp, let's turn the focus toward the actual season, talking about season predictions. I can sort of start on this, what we think Georgia's going to do, where we think things are going to end up. On Friday, I will have a story really breaking down in detail my game predictions, talking about final scores, talking about how things are going to play out. Just as a preview to that, I have Georgia going 12-0 in the regular season. There are only 2 games that I had Georgia as a favorite by less than 10 points, and those 2 games are late in the season. It's going to be at Mississippi State, and after that, the week after that, at Kentucky. I have Georgia beating Mississippi State by 4 points, and I have Georgia beating Kentucky by a touchdown. The rest of these games I think are very manageable. I think the fact you look specifically at those 2 games late in the year, both games on the road. Mississippi State is not a team that is not up for the challenge of playing highly ranked teams. They've done a very good job in the short time Mike Leach has been there at being able to pull upsets, beating ranked teams. Obviously, his very first game during that 2020 COVID year, they beat the defending national champions LSU. I think that that's going to be a very tight game. To me, that's the game that screams to me an opportunity that Georgia could lose on the road. I still have Georgia winning. Again, I have Georgia going 12-0. I think this team is very good. I think it benefits from the schedule. Oregon's going to be the toughest game as far as non-conference goes. The fact that you play South Carolina early in the year, you do have to go there, but they're coming off a road game at Arkansas. I think that's going to be a very physical game that's going to wear out South Carolina and help Georgia when it comes to playing that road game. The opportunities they have with the schedule, getting Tennessee, who I have finishing second in the East, getting them at home, I think is a huge win. I think that that's going to help Georgia significantly. I have Georgia going 12-0 in the regular season. I'll go ahead and say that I think they're going to play Alabama in the SEC title game. I think Alabama's going to win that game. I do think Georgia has a chance to still make the playoff, probably get in as that 4th seed. My 4 playoff teams were Alabama, Ohio State, Utah, and Georgia. And I think that would qualify as a very successful season, coming off what they lost, coming off having 15 players drafted. I think Georgia has an opportunity to have a really good year, and it's going to be fascinating to see how they get started on Saturday.
The schedule is really favorable for Georgia. Just looking now back at last year's schedule, it was 100% more difficult than this one. I think you said it. It's in that month of November, toward the end of the year. No team's really healthy. You have no idea what the teams are going to really look like in terms of who's hurt and who's not. But just looking at the teams right now on paper, Georgia will be favored by double digits in every game they play this year during the regular season. I mean, we're seeing it right now. We're talking about Oregon. At worst, I think it's pretty universal. It's a top 3 opponent for Georgia this season. I mean, you can mix in, obviously, Florida's in there, whether that's Auburn, Tennessee, Kentucky, and, they're all in the mix there as well. But Georgia's favored by 17.5. And so that kind of tells you what people think about the talent Georgia still has on the roster this year. I think that, there are games where Georgia will be pushed, but I think their road games are all manageable. And I think that I think Kentucky could still be the second best team in the East, But like I said before, what they're trying to do is too similar to what Georgia tries to do for them to really be, the type of team to catch Georgia off guard. Georgia's not going to let them win the line of scrimmage battle. And I think that, playing at Kentucky, sure, I mean, that adds that element. And maybe at that time of the year, what's the weather going to be like? But Kirby's been there before, and he knows what to tell the team that week. I think the toughest stretch of the year for Georgia will be that, that first and second week in November. It's Tennessee and Mississippi State. It's the youth and the secondary. These teams are going to throw the ball. They're going to throw the ball a lot. Has Georgia's secondary gotten enough reps, and are they playing at a high enough level? Do they have the depth to be able to withstand teams that are just going to sit back and throw the ball all day? Being a little bit one-dimensional will probably play into, Glenn Schumann and Will Muschamp and Kirby Smart's plans a little bit, but they still have to have the team ready for that. And they got to have the depth there, and not just in the secondary, but they got to have pass rushers who can come in and still affect the quarterback. I think Hendon Hooker is a guy that you really got. I mean, you got to get in his face, or he is going to pick you apart and dink and dunk down the field. All the offseason discussion on Anthony Richardson, I don't see anything that tells me he's a better quarterback than Hendon Hooker is. I think that's the best, pure passer that Georgia will face during this season. And I think he's a guy, when you're looking at teams that could potentially upset Georgia, it has to start at the quarterback position. And you got to have a guy who can, make plays and lift his team up when they're playing a team they're not as talented as. And he is one of those guys that I think can do that. Looking at the rest of the schedule, I don't see it. I don't see it with Anthony Richardson. If Kirby's right and Bo Nix is the starter for Oregon, I think he's a guy that Georgia knows well enough to be able to prepare for. Getting him on the ground is obviously the key there. And I think that, they have the guys to do that. And yeah, just looking at the rest of the schedule, I think that it bodes really well for Georgia. I think they go into Atlanta 12-0, and I think the key for them in those last couple of games, when you're playing Kentucky, but then playing Georgia Tech, is you got to remember what happened last year when you went to Atlanta. You kind of cruised through that season and got all the press and the high rankings. They're going to need to remember that in November. If they're coming into November, 8-0, they're going to have to remind themselves that they've been humbled before. And I think that's what Kirby Smart's going to work on this season, is when everyone loves you, that's really when you have to push yourself the hardest, because you can really, you can have a letdown game. And if Georgia loses during the regular season, I think it's going to be pretty universally considered a letdown game for Georgia. So it's up to them. And so as of right now on paper, I think 12-0 is a pretty solid bet for the Georgia Bulldogs.
Jimmy Spires said earlier in this broadcast, my Dogs will have an upset loss to Tennessee because they play too fast. The only reason I want to bring that up was during one of the viewing periods we had a few weeks ago. As we walked out there, you heard Kirby yelling, Tennessee, 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 and trying to get everybody lined up. They were working on, it's not even the start of the year. They understand they have to be ready and conditioned for when that game comes, because Tennessee is going to be moving quick.
Definitely. I think, and that's really that aspect, is their goal is going to be to cancel out your ability to rotate and keep those guys on the field, as long as possible. I think, that was that one question mark with a guy like Jordan Davis. He definitely impacts the game when he's on the field, but, he's only giving you 20 snaps a game. But Jalen Carter, that he's going to be that guy who can be on the field 3 downs for them. It's up to some of these other guys to show that, they can be those guys too, that late in the game, hands on your hips. Can you still, reel it in and play high level football? And we heard it last year with the players, and Kirby basically toward the end of the year is the hardest time for them was in practice. And it leads to some injuries and some of their guys being banged up, but it also leads to them, the toughness that they had. And that kind of conditioning. If we're pushed the hardest in practice, then Saturday should be a breeze. And so I definitely think that's what Georgia's going for. And I think that it should bode pretty well for them. I mean, Tennessee ran a lot of plays last year. I think they had like 85 plays on offense last year, and it took every one of those plays, for them to get in the end zone more than once. And I think if they're getting in the end zone twice against Georgia, they're probably still not going to win that football game. So they may score 14 or 17 or even 20 against Georgia this year, but they still might lose by 3 touchdowns.
Before we get out of here, Kipp, last night, Monroe Freeland commits to Georgia. Big 4-star gives Georgia its 19th commit in the 2023 class. Just quick thoughts on what that addition means for Georgia getting another big offensive lineman in this class.
I guess it means Stacey Searles gets to keep his job into the season.
Man, I was worried there, Kipp.
Yeah, that the offseason is ruthless, and Georgia fans have high standards in recruiting for sure. But when you go from Sam Pittman to Matt Luke to Stacey Searles, you still want you want to see the results be kind of similar. I mean, Georgia fans got spoiled. I mean, Sam Pittman, as far as a recruiter is concerned, is probably the best offensive line recruiter of any school of recent. And Matt Luke, being a former head coach, I mean, he held it down and maybe got more out of his offensive line than Sam Pittman did. And now, Stacey Searles, a guy that, again, known as being a very highly thought of tactician. As far as his ability to coach the offensive line, he's very highly regarded in the coaching circles. It's recruiting where, can he keep up with Kirby Smart's standard that he set at Georgia? And you just kind of look at this first class that Stacey Searles has for Georgia. It's a pretty solid group. They got recruited against by everyone based on all the guys they already had on board from the previous classes and the offensive line coaches. But now he's got 3 4-stars and a 3-star that is probably going to end up being a steal, and a guy that worked out for Georgia and Joshua Miller that now Andrew Ivins saw him last weekend and said, this guy is the real deal. So it looks like Stacey Searles identified and landed several highly talented offensive line prospects. And lo and behold, Georgia's back at number 3 in the class rankings. Kirby Smart's recruiting is not gone off the rails. I guess, he's still got a chance. They can keep the 10-year contract extension for him. He could stay at Georgia a couple more years. And maybe that the summer recruiting, we're going to remember this next summer when Georgia misses on a couple of guys. Maybe hold tight there and let the recruiting cycle take care of itself a little bit. NIL's changed things a little bit, but Georgia's offensive line group's really talented. I really like what Monroe brings to the table. 6'7", 285 pounds, prototype left tackle. You pair him with a guy like Bo Hughley, you got yourself a pair of bona fide offensive tackles. And, everyone can talk about wide receivers as much as they want, but the line of scrimmage is where Georgia has won under Kirby Smart. It's what he said when he got the job. I'm going to win the battle at the line of scrimmage. And he's continuing to do that on the recruiting trail. So I don't think that system's going away anytime soon.
We're going to wrap it up right there. Appreciate everybody popping on to listen to our season preview. Appreciate Kipp taking some time to talk and go through these over-unders and what we think is going to happen this year. Thanks to everybody who is watching on Facebook Live and also on YouTube. Make sure, again, look in the comments. We've got a link to Dogs247's YouTube page. I want to make sure and give a shout-out to our Junkyard board member, Duke. We're thinking about you today. Had a chance to see some of the comments on our board. It was really nice to see that. So we are going to wrap it up right there. For Kipp Adams, I am Jordan Hill. Again, thanks everybody for watching, for listening, for subscribing. Make sure and tell all your friends about the podcast. Again, go to the YouTube and subscribe to Dogs247. Appreciate everybody. We will have another episode later this week, talking with Oregon beat writers and talking about this game on Saturday. It'll be really interesting and really exciting to hop on and see what they have to say. So until then, thanks everybody. Take care and get ready for game day on Saturday.